This program is brought to you by Newsworks in cooperation with Eau Claire County. This program is simulcast on WRFP-LP 101.9 FM.
Well, good evening, everyone. I'm pleased to call this meeting of the Eau Claire County Board of Supervisors to order here on April 4th, 2018. Please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance, followed by a moment of reflection by Supervisor Colleen Bates. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
This last week, there's been much conversation about Martin Luther King. And we know how difficult change is. And we also know how difficult it is to be a part of making that change. Each person here has sought this citizen servant role, aspiring to show that their effort on this body will make a difference. As familiar faces stepped out, each has their own claim to have done so. Each has given of their time, their talent, their dedication to this place we call home. In Parker Palmer's Healing the Heart of Democracy, he describes the attributes of boards and bodies that make that possible. I'd like to share some of them with you because I think they pertain to this board and many local governments like it. First, the understanding that we are all in this together. We are profoundly interconnected. We recognize and we appreciate the creative possibilities inherent in our differences. We are dependent and accountable to one another. We came knowing this should not be a spectator sport, but a place to find our voices. We aspired to multiply the power of one voice into a sense of community, building support in the greater public arena to achieve positive change in the community we all love. As we began this term of office, we were inspired to create a politics worthy of the spirit of democracy, to act courageously, relentlessly, without giving up, ever, trusting our fellow citizens to join us in our determining what the future of our community will look like. We aspired to make a difference, and I believe we have, and let the good work go on.
Thank you, Supervisor Bates. Now, if supervisors would please take your keypad and indicate your presence here this evening, and we'll establish our quorum. So we have 27 present. We have a quorum. We'll move on to the approval of the journal proceedings for March 20th. You'll find that in your meeting packet, pages 3 and 4. Are there any suggested changes to the journal proceedings as drafted? I see none. I'd entertain a motion to approve those as drafted. Motion by Supervisor Beckfield, second by Supervisor Dunning. Any discussion? I see none. All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed, no. Motion carries. Moving on to public comment. This is an opportunity at each meeting for citizens to address the board on anything they'd like to speak of. We have two individuals this evening. We ask folks to limit their remarks to 3 minutes, and we'll start with Daryl Peterson. So, Mr. Peterson, if you come forward, please, to the podium here. The mic should be on, right? Good evening and welcome.
Thank you. I'd like to speak on the rezoning on London Road from R3, or R1, excuse me, to R3. I live in the area. The applicant has said in previous meetings that one of the reasons for this...
We're getting the mic turned up a little higher here for you, so you're fine.
Okay. One of the reasons for this is there is a need for housing in that area. I live in the area. There are new housing units put up on London Road and Sessions that are still empty. So I don't see a need for more housing units. Just because another reason he's put on there was that the people would have to have 3 times the income for the rent. Just because someone can afford the rent doesn't make them a positive impact on the neighborhood. As far as I can see, the only reason for this rezoning is in the interest of money of the applicant, who does not live in the area at all. I see a need for more affordable single-family homes so people can take pride in what they live in. After all, I've always felt the American dream was to own your own home. At the town meeting, I didn't feel very comfortable with the town members. Has nothing to do with this meeting, but they just seemed like they were making jokes with the applicant and didn't really take the people serious that live in the neighborhood. And just because there's city water and sewer to this property, it doesn't mean you have to put housing units in there. The town has got a long-range plan that I never knew about, that this was going to be a kind of a mixed use area, and no one's ever explained that to me or to current homeowners as far as I know. My last thing is, I guess I just don't see why someone who has used this property in the past for a parking lot, sandblasting for his business, dumping all sorts of concrete, wood, dirt, anything you can think of as like construction materials in the back portion of this lot. I just don't see the need for this to move forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Our next individual, Bethany. I'm not quite sure your last name, but I know it's Bethany, Ida or whatever.
Okay, Ida, yeah.
Okay, Ida, great. Okay, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for letting me speak. I'm talking about the same issue, the rezoning of London Road. I live on 3358 London Road. And just to give you an idea of our neighborhood, most of us have 2 lots. One side is the city side, and one side is our little piece of country. We have deer in our backyard. We have peace in our backyard, trees. I can go into the back of my yard and just feel like I'm up in the mountains or just, far away until a siren goes by and then I come back in Eau Claire. But it's nice and peaceful, and this is why we chose to live here. And the property that is going to be changed has been a duplex. They've said it's not in the best condition, but I know other houses that are 100 years old, owned by business owners who have been, restored beautifully. There's been dirt. It's not been well taken care of. I understand other properties are by this owner, and I have nothing against the other work, the apartment buildings. I'm sure that they're great. But we have lived in a neighborhood with overall single-person homes. We have a nice community. We have space. We have freedom. And I feel like suddenly that's being trampled on in the name of business. And that's been really hard to deal with. I feel like we've already had an issue with strangers walking through our yards. We've had to call the cops. We've had people breaking in next door, robbers who talk to me. London Road has its own issues, and I'm not sure that inviting more people to come live there is going to solve the issues that we already have. And I hope when people look at this issue, they would imagine their own house. If your house or your neighbor's house is for sale, are you going to feel comfortable with somebody else buying it and putting up apartments next to you when you've had all this space and room and beauty? You know, if you're okay with that, then that's okay. But if you feel like you might be a little upset, or you wouldn't be calling an apartment building builders and saying, oh yeah, please come build right next to my house, then I would please ask that you just rethink this. I feel like there's different things that could be done with the property. I feel like the voice of the neighbor is suddenly going to be drowned out. There's people that have lived here for 33 years. We've lived here for about 16 years. And suddenly I feel like our voices don't matter. There are some neighbors who are furthest, but the majority, you know, there's about 6 or 8 of us who are around in that area who've come to these meetings, and we're saying, please, please hear our voice. Because if our neighborhood, if the neighbor doesn't matter, that says a lot. Businesses come and go. Your neighbors are the ones you rely on when times get rough. The type of neighborhood you have is what's important when times get rough and things go up and down. I also worry about London Road. Since they put in a quick trip between so off of Bryan and London, that intersection has gotten very busy, almost to the point where you could use a stop sign. And I worry that the property is about 4 houses down from where it's already busy. I worry about traffic there. I worry about accidents. But mostly I just want to feel like you can be a house owner in this town and not have to defend your prosperity. You know, we have lived here for a long time. If our voices don't matter, whose voice does other than business? And I have, you know, great respect for Paul and Bill. I just don't want to see, like, you know, I don't want to be looking out at apartment buildings. And if you start with one area, there's other homes that are rented out. Other people could start building apartments too. And we know that there's been talk about that. Literally right next door to my house, it could change from trees and wood and fires in the summer to a huge apartment complex. And that's just not comfortable. And a lot of us aren't in a position to move. And why should we have to even consider moving? It's our neighborhood. They have other properties. We only get one neighborhood. So thank you for listening. And please look at it from a business side. I can understand that. But also look at your own neighborhood and how you would feel if it was your neighborhood, or if your children came to you and said that this was going on. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yeah. Those were the only individuals that signed up. I'll just ask before closing our public comment if there's anyone else from the public who would like to speak this evening. Steve Rasmussen. Welcome.
Thank you, Greg. I'm Steve Rasmussen. I'm currently and soon to be retired board chair over in Dunn County. And I'm here tonight to give a little tribute to my friend and colleague, Greg Moore. You have been blessed with his leadership. The state has been blessed at Wisconsin Counties Association with his leadership. I've been blessed with his friendship. We've been blessed to be able to work together, Dunn County and Eau Claire County, in addressing common interests and needs. I was just talking to the sheriff a little bit ago. Thank you for paying rent over in our facility. But most of all, thank you, Greg, for your leadership and your companionship, and I know that you'll be sorely missed here in Eau Claire County. So, thank you.
Thank you very much, Steve. Anyone else from the public? I don't see anyone. We'll move on. Presentation of petitions, claims, and communications. Any announcements this evening? I've got one proclamation here. It's in your packet. Excuse me. Just a little choked up. Sure, that's the clerk.
Proclaiming April 15th through the 21st, 2018 as National Volunteer Week in Eau Claire County. Whereas the entire community can inspire, equip, and mobilize people to take action that changes the world. And whereas individuals and communities are at the center of social change, discovering their power to make a difference. And whereas during this week, all over the nation, service projects will be performed and volunteers recognized for their commitment to service. And whereas the giving of oneself in service to another empowers the giver and the recipient, and whereas experience teaches us that government by itself cannot solve all of the nation's social problems, and whereas the Aging and Disability Resource Center of Eau Claire County could not provide many of the services it offers without volunteers, and whereas our ADC's volunteer force of more than 200 individuals who contributed more than 14,000 hours in 2017 is a great treasure valued at over $335,000 annually, and whereas volunteers are vital to our future as a caring and productive nation. Now therefore, the Chair of the Eau Claire County Board of Supervisors proclaims April 15th to the 21st, 2018 as National Volunteer Week in Eau Claire County.
Thank you, Janet. May I have a motion, please? Motion by Supervisor Smyers, second by Supervisor Gottman. Any discussion on this? I see none. All in favor of that motion, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Moving on to business here this evening, we'll start with file 120.
To amend section 2.52.010F of the code, definitions, and to amend section 2.52.020 of the code, Health Department established, and to amend section 2.52.040C and H of the code, powers and duties, and to amend section 2.52.050 of the code, regulations.
May I have a motion, please? Motion by Supervisor Olson, second by Supervisor Beckfield, and an explanation by Supervisor Bates.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is again part of the relooking in the strategic plan and updating the code and reflecting changes. And this one happens to be in the Health and Human Services name change, and also establishment of the Health Department within the City of County of Eau Claire, along with their regulations and rules. So I would urge your support to approve this resolution.
Thank you for the explanation. Any questions or discussion on this motion? I see none. Please take your keypad and vote. The motion before us, it's file 120 to amend various sections of the code concerning Health Department. Supervisor Chilson, if you'd re-vote there, take for some reason, thank you very much. That motion's adopted unanimously. Moving on to file 129.
Recognizing, commending, and thanking Eau Claire County Board Supervisors upon their dedicated years of service.
May I have a motion, please? Motion by Supervisor Leary, second by Supervisor Cronk. You have in front of you the resolution recognizing the 8 individuals for whom this is their last meeting. And let me just say, well, let's vote and then I'll say some things. Actually, no, let me just say a couple of things. So these are the 8 individuals for whom this is their last meeting, and everybody's provided a great deal of service to this community, some for many years, some for fewer years. On their desks is a plaque, a certificate. It reads the same for everyone. In recognition and appreciation for dedicated and valued public service to the citizens of Eau Claire County as County Board Supervisor, named and presented this 4th day of April 2018. Why don't we vote on the motion before us, please? Thank you, and Supervisor Koenig. I was going to do a voice vote on that, but and that is unanimous. Thank you, everyone. And what I'd like to do is provide an opportunity for each of the supervisors to make just some brief remarks on this. And we'll start. I talked to Gordy earlier. Supervisor Gordy Steinhauer, been a supervisor since 1987. And thank you for your service, Gordy, and give you a chance to say a few words.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's actually 1985.
Oh my, okay. Duly noted, we'll get it in the record, we'll get that corrected.
Oh, I've just been corrected by Pat here. He said it is 87.
Oh.
Anyway, I want to say thank you to everyone for about 33 really good years, and I enjoyed every minute of it. And I enjoyed all the county supervisors. Some of them I haven't spoken to much, but I've enjoyed every county supervisor. Also, and I really enjoyed all the county staff. The staff that I see here, but then also the staff that I've worked with in different departments, especially the health department and different places I've had some dealings with. I've enjoyed every minute of it, and so this is a great time together, and I'm really thankful for it.
Thank you, Marty. Supervisor Clark. 1992, I believe. Whoop, you probably want your mic on, huh?
Same years you graduated.
Okay.
Yes, I came here directly from high school. Thank you to all of you. This has been an outstanding experience, and I too have enjoyed it. And in thinking back, you know, I think Congress should come and witness this county board at work, because it shows that you can have differing opinions and still get things done, important things. And this board has shown me that time and time and time again over these past years, and I appreciate that. I also appreciate the fact that you people have helped me get through some really rough times in my life. And I appreciate that too. Thank you all.
I should clarify, not everyone needs to say anything, so you're under no obligation to make any remarks, and I didn't check with folks ahead of time, so I apologize for that. But in terms of seniority on the board, Supervisor Cronic is next in line.
Thank you. A wise man once told me that supervisors like diapers should be changed, and for the same reason.
And that's the end, okay. Thank you. Supervisor Conlon.
Thank you.
Supervisor Olson.
I want to thank everyone on, all the supervisors for all the help you've given me figuring out what's going on in the past 4+ years. Made some good friends. Hopefully stay in touch as time goes along. And when I first got into public service, on the political end of it, I knew that it wasn't going to be a long-term process, and I feel comfortable going out now at this time, and even more comfortable when one of my neighbors decided that she was going to run for the position, so kind of keeping it right in the neighborhoods. Thanks, everybody.
Supervisor Mortimer.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to thank my colleague supervisors just for a wonderful 2 years. Amazing learning that especially happened, and departments that I was privileged to be a part of, the ADRC, and Jennifer Spiking, the director, and Dan Cable with Human Services. And those committees, those boards were just tremendous. The department, the staff that we have are just amazing, and I was just very privileged to be a part of that. Thank you.
And let me just briefly say, so I've been on the board for 14 years, and it's been a great experience, very, very positive. And one of the things that's impressed me, and it's kind of echoing some of the remarks, is the quality of individuals who serve on this board. I think we've all shared a deep commitment to public service, an unwavering faithfulness to doing what one believes is in the best interest of the citizens, and respectfully debating what have sometimes been fairly controversial issues. As my predecessor as board chair, Bruce Willett, used to say, it's fine to disagree, but we need not be disagreeable. In developing, reasonable people can and do disagree, and we've disagreed. In developing public policy, I believe we and the public and the citizens of Eau Claire County should be very proud of the civility we have consistently demonstrated as a legislative body, the thoughtfulness of our debates in committee and on the board, and the seriousness with which we have assumed our responsibilities. Also, as I reflect on my time with Eau Claire County, I recognize that we are blessed with outstanding employees and other elected officials. I know it's made my job easier, and I think it's made all of our jobs easier and helped us be more successful fulfilling our responsibilities. And finally, I just want to say how deeply grateful I am to my constituents who elected me as their representative on this board, to you who have allowed me to serve as board chair, and to all the wonderful county employees, elected officials, community leaders, and other wonderful people with whom I've had the great pleasure of working. Thank you all very much. And we do have some additional business. We'll move on to file 134.
Purchasing property in the town of Seymour consistent with a Section 404 hazard mitigation grant for flood abatement.
May I have a motion, please? A motion by Supervisor Beckfield, second by Supervisor Schroffnagel, an explanation by Supervisor Bates.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. As you can see, this did begin with our applying for a grant to actually turn this property at risk into something that was less risky. And what you see in front of you is a proposal for this property to be purchased with that grant money of $105,000, which would cover not only the purchase of the buildings, but also the disposal of the buildings, the leveling of the property to make it into just a natural site, and to remove the, in an appropriate way, the well that is on the property. The proposal also is deed restricted, which means the ownership will stay with the county or another municipality. So it looks as though this indeed is a very good deal for the county to take some land that otherwise could be developed further in a floodplain and return it to a much more appropriate use. The owners have agreed to accept the officer, but it must be approved by the board this evening, and I urge your support.
Thank you for the explanation. Any questions or discussion on this motion? Any questions or discussion? I see none. It appears you're ready to vote, so please do so at this time. The motion before us concerns file 134, purchasing property in the town of Seymour for a FEMA grant on flood abatement. And that motion is adopted unanimously. Moving on to file 133.
Creating one correctional officer, utility position.
May I have a motion on this, please? Motion by Supervisor Gatlin, second by Supervisor Miller. And an explanation, we'll start with Supervisor Clark. It came from HR committee, but I'll provide Supervisor Miller an opportunity to speak because I know Judiciary and Law also looked at it. So Supervisor Clark.
I'm sorry I was not at the meeting,
Ah,
and so if Supervisor Miller.
Miller can speak to it on behalf of both committees, okay? Supervisor Miller.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and yes, I'm going to wear both hats tonight, but I also, I'm sure other committee members will be able to jump in and respond and or speak to this as well. Hopefully you all had an opportunity to read through the fact sheet that came along with this resolution. It actually, the HR committee and Judiciary and Law met last week, but it was a culmination of work that's been done by both the Sheriff's Department and Human Resources really over the past year in terms of finding and coming up with creative ways and strategies to address the shortages that or turnovers that we have in the jail, just how to fill leaves of absences, the overtime issue, on and on and on. And, you know, judiciary and law, for example, had talked about, well, could we just hire more part-time people? Well, that thought worked for a very brief amount of time, because as soon as a full-time job became available somewhere else, people moved on. We've had, you know, just through attrition, retirements, what have you, an ongoing need to address the overtime, because right now, when someone is not able to fill their shift, there's a mandatory call-in. If somebody is already there for 8 hours, they might end up having to work another 4 before they go home. Or someone might have to be called in on the weekend when they weren't scheduled to begin with. So all in all, this idea of what we call a utility position, as it were, is someone who will specifically work to fill those shifts. Now, obviously, it's not going to address the entire need that we would have, but at least it would give us a start at carving away some of the overtime hours. And we had, thanks to Supervisor Conlon at the meeting, the staff went back and looked. Last year in the jail operation alone, there was over 14,000 hours of overtime. One position is only going to address 2,080 hours as a full-time position. But at least it would be giving us a start to see if we can do more of this down the road. Will it help? We don't know. Positively, we feel it's going to help at least address that need. In terms of fiscal concerns, it's going to be absorbed through the budget that's already in place. Instead of paying overtime, we're going to be able to pay straight time, so that'll help there. One thing I wanted to point out, the fact sheet started out by saying to take effect July 1. Actually, the committees last week had just said, we've got to get this in place and get it in place now, because that would give us the opportunity of several months to see how effective this will be, to perhaps work towards something towards 2019. So I hope that you've had an opportunity, like I said, to read this. It's going to address some of the challenges. By no means will it address them all, but it will cut back a little bit on some of that forced overtime order in on the current employees, where then hopefully that'll help somewhat with the morale issues when they don't have to get called in and so on. With that, I think I'll just leave and ask if some of the other committee members would like to respond to it, and I certainly hope you give strong consideration to this resolution.
Thank you, Supervisor Miller. We'll open up and we'll go Supervisor Beckfield.
I was at that meeting and with the HR committee, and one of the biggest things that I saw is the possibility from staff of employee satisfaction. One of our issues in that department is you don't know when you're going home, and this floater position would take care of that. So that person knows going in that that would be that floater position. In our world it's called, this they want to call a utility. The other thing is it has the sheriff's support and the sheriff's staff support, which is important to me. There was no fiscal impact in this particular case. I actually can see this as a pilot program, but I also see it being expanded to additional, as I said in the meeting, an additional 1 or 2 soon down the road, but give it a go and let's see how it works out, and I think it's going to work.
Thank you. Supervisor Conlon.
Yeah, if any fiscal impact there is, it ought to be a slight savings, because basically what they're doing is trading straight hours for overtime hours, and they're already spending the money. It should save money, employee satisfaction, use of the facilities ought to go a lot smoother with the people not so stressed out, so it should be a good thing.
Thank you. Supervisor Wilkie.
Yeah, I too am very much in support of this. We've talked during the budget time that we recognize that every time we lose a correctional officer, we're losing $40,000 to $50,000 of training that's going out the door. Not only are they in a position where they don't know if they're going to be going home on time, they only get every other weekend off, and you can imagine during the summer, if you're ordered in, 2 times, there goes your summer as far as any weekend off. Now, of course, for a brief time, the additional overtime pay is nice in the paycheck, but it's not so nice on family life for them. So wanting a balance in their life, they have to set their priorities, and hence we continue the cycle of continuing losing folks and in the process of recruiting them. I think this is a very good step forward, and as it's been pointed out, the department has indicated that they're confident they can handle the expense of this new position within their existing budget. So budget impact at this point is 0. I encourage you to support it.
Thank you. Supervisor McKinney.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And sitting on the Judiciary Committee for at least the past year, we've been hearing the challenges of having people even apply for these positions. And so I think this is a solution. Well, it might just be a temporary solution. I do think it will be an asset to, and I support this. And I really appreciated the 2 different committees working together on this. So thank you.
Thank you. Supervisor Gatton.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just echoing the other comments, but what I'm saying is that it's really a strong display of showing the value and how we care about our most valuable resources, which is the employees, and it will help to increase the morale, keep them safe, and emotional and mental well-being so they can do the best job possible. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who'd like to speak? I don't see anyone else. Supervisor Olson.
I guess I have more of a question on the resolution that on line 13, where it talks about costs change. Is that really necessary then to have in the resolution if it's being funded by the overtime money that we're using now? So really there's no cost. So I guess I would like to, unless there's a good reason to have that.
I think we'll give Corp Counsel or Administration a chance to comment about that. Keith?
Actually, that is indicating to the board what the anticipated cost of adding that full-time equivalent position will be. And the value of having that there is I do know that the Sheriff's Department intends to keep metrics on how successful this is in meeting their objectives and goals. And so having this from the start and knowing what that cost is and having it as part of the resolution sets that benchmark for future work. So, and it's not saying anything that the budget's being changed in any way, it's simply there as an informational point. So I'm not really, I guess I don't understand exactly what your issue with having the number in the resolution is.
Well, because it's when it's saying the cost of this change is, and it gives a dollar amount. Well, actually, if we're using the overtime money that's already been budgeted, it's already there. So,
correct.
So why are we?
Because it's
putting it in a second time, I guess.
You aren't putting it in a second time, you are simply reallocating it for a different use.
Okay, anything else before we vote? It appears you're ready to vote, so please do so. Motion before us concerns file 133, creating one FTE correctional officer utility position. And that motion is adopted unanimously. Moving on, file 128.
Amending the 1982 official zoning district boundary map for the town of Washington.
I have a motion, please. Motion by Supervisor Henning, with a second by Supervisor Chilson, and an explanation by Supervisor Gibson.
Thank you, Chairman Moore. This is a rezoning application to rezone 0.9 acres of land from R1M, which is single-family resident district, to the R3, which is multifamily resident district, to to allow the development of a multi-family residential building. This was reviewed by the town of Washington and meets what they have designated that area for in their comprehensive plan. It was reviewed by planning and development and recommended for approval because it meets all the criteria and the code for the county, and so they're recommending approval of it.
Thank you for the explanation. Supervisor, opening up for discussion and questions, Supervisor Chilson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I read the fact sheet on that. I guess I'm looking at the vote out of P&D, and it looks like it was 3-2. And that sounds to me like there was some discussion about the rezone, so if some of those people could address that and talk about the concerns that were in that meeting, I would be interested in hearing that.
Okay, next in line to speak is Supervisor Pagonis. Maybe, I don't know if you were in a 3 or a 2, but
I was in the 3. I made the motion. So I'm
Okay.
going to explain why I made the motion and what my thinking was. That particular section of, I'm going to say Eau Claire, of the town of Washington, is already very piecemeal. Immediately across the street from this property, it's zone commercial. Down the street is another a rather large apartment building, and then there are a series of houses. The particular house that is looked to be raised is reported to be in bad shape, and individuals who spoke indicated it was in bad shape. I made the motion in support because, in deference to the town of Washington, they have a long-range comprehensive plan. They want it to be a mixed-use area. As one of the speakers indicated, right down the street is a Quick Trip. So it's already very mixed, and the apartments that are being presented appear to be fairly high-end apartments. Some of the complaints by the neighbors have been they're too high-end for them to live in. So I felt some of the what appeared to be questionable about garbage and piles of dirt, we're not going to see that because they're going to be high-end apartments. So I'm supportive of this primarily because the town of Washington voted 5-0. They clearly want this to happen. They have already changed, they've modified their comprehensive plan to include this type of future mixed use, and I think we need to be respectful of what the town of Washington wants to do. So I made the motion in P&D and I voted in favor of it. So I think I'll have to talk to one of the others to find out what their opposition was.
thank you. Getting back then to Supervisor Chilson, asking if there's someone who is in the 2 who would like to speak. Supervisor Olson.
I had very strongly opposed this at our meeting. Here's a neighborhood that's been established. Mr. Peterson stated he's been in that neighborhood for 31 years. And I'm sorry, I can't remember the other lady's name. She said, it's been there about 15 years. This is a well-established, single-family residential area. Yeah, it's commercial across the street, and at the top of the street, there's some commercial property that's got a special use permit that put a 55 and older apartment building in it. But the rest is all zoned single-family residential. This property, back in 2007, the developer petitioned to have this apartment put in at that time, and it got defeated by the town 2-2 vote. Now 11 years later, property is in worse shape than it ever was, piles of dirt there, and they want to come in and stick a 14 to 16 unit apartment building right in the middle of a single family home. It's like that, right next to your house, have someone come and put an apartment building, 14 to 16 minimum building in there. And they say, well, these will be high-end, they're doing some building in Altoona, these will be great. Well, in the past 11 years, they showed they haven't been able to keep up the property that was already there. And it was just a duplex. And they're telling neighbors, don't worry, Well, I'd be damn worried if I was a neighbor that here I've looked at this property for 11 years and nothing, it's just gone downhill, and now they want to come in and put an apartment building in. Especially when it's a neighborhood, single-family homes. And now they want to put in this apartment building. It doesn't make any sense. I look at my neighborhood, I live up on the north side, off of Star Avenue. It's commercial on one side, there's got XL Energy, got some other businesses there, residential across the street. They came in and they wanted to put a 14 or 16 unit apartment building next to my house. I'd be screaming. One thing, the city wouldn't allow it to happen. And this rezoning of it doesn't make sense. You know, yeah, you like to set up barriers, go from commercial to multifamily to single family homes. But that was never set up that way in the beginning. Now you've got a pocket of single family homes that you want to destroy by putting in an apartment complex. I just can't understand why we would support that.
Thank you. Supervisor Stelgis.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Some of my questions were answered about what the realistic density would be. I think Supervisor Olston suggested that it might be 14 to 16.
Minimum.
Even though the theoretical was 29. So.
They could go that.
So is that a good estimate for, okay. The other thing that got my attention here was the committee action, and it says the committee considered the applicant's testimony as well as the town board's and staff's recommendations in their deliberations. But did they consider the neighbors? It says they didn't. I mean, I find that kind of wanting. Can anybody ask if the neighbors' concerns were considered?
Supervisor Gibson, can you speak to that, please?
They are. Planning and Development sends out letters within a certain radius, so everyone knew about it. All of them were able to attend or wanted to come and attend the meeting. They can, and they can speak at each meeting.
But I think the question is, were their concerns considered in your deliberations?
I would have to assume yes. They were all presented. But we also have to look at what the town's plan and what they designate for. That's what the whole, back in 2000, when the state required your towns and counties to put a plan together, that's what they had to do, is they had to identify each area as to what they thought it should be in the future and moving forward.
Just another follow-on. I know the town of Washington is going through, maybe they've completed the process of changing their comprehensive plan. What was in the comp plan, has that changed from 2007 to now?
I haven't, you'd have to ask the town of Washington, but it meets what the comprehensive plan says right now, that's what they designated that area.
Is there any objection if Matt Michaels, senior planner, answers Supervisor Stelgis' question? I see no objection, so Matt, if you could
sure.
Answer that, please.
So county staff has actually been working with the town of Washington over the last year and a half to update their plan, which was originally adopted in 2009, and they did not, they discussed each area. They held open houses, about 15 meetings, surveys, etc., and went through each area and their designations. That is not an area that has changed. So that designation of urban mixed use has been on the books, if you will, for the better part of 10 years.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Supervisor Dunning.
I was also a vote against this particular resolution. My concern was I think as Mr. Michaels just stated, that's been on the books since 2010 or thereabouts as far as the proposed changes in the future. But in all of the hearings, or all of the people that spoke at ours, were not aware of the master plan that was being proposed. And so if you look at the two maps that are in there, you look at where the current one, and I believe it's Bryan Street, that has residential on both sides, and that's residential then going up to London Road. This master plan changes all of those streets to multiple dwellings or to the rezoning, which could hinder them. We've got a fairly large residential area here that is being changed, and I think it was I don't know, you can always look back and say we should have been known, but most people don't, whether their concerns were addressed in 2010 or whenever the last comprehensive plan was, it didn't appear to be, they didn't appear to know that they had been. When you've lived there 35 years or 15 years, you would have covered at least one, if not more than one comprehensive plan, and known what was, or had the opportunity to know what was going on. So I voted against it because I thought it was strange for the town to take it at this time to change a very dense residential area of single-family homes and then start making it all available to multifamily. That was why I voted against it.
Thank you. Supervisor Buchanan.
Yes, thank you. This is a little bit of a difficult vote for me because when you go around our town, you can see communities and areas where multifamily developments have been done right, and you can see areas where they've been done wrong. I'm a very strong believer in high design standards for multi-development buildings, for single-family homes, and sometimes it's a little hard for me to tell just with the presentation that was brought before us in our packet exactly what all those materials will be, and so that's what makes this a little bit difficult for me. But I wanted to just mention a couple of things. That there was this kind of talk about multifamily being buffers, and that's an old way of thinking that has since been proven to be inaccurate in how we design communities. That we have a commercial area over here, we maybe plot multifamilies all together, and then we have single families all over here. And we isolate people who rent, we isolate multifamilies away from everyone else. And when we look across this nation, when we look across our community in Eau Claire, we've seen that when we actually have effective integrated communities, that actually works better, and it lifts everybody up. I know that absolutely no ill will was intended, and I'm not saying that there was, but I did want to make these following statements. That people who rent can take pride in their neighborhoods, they can take pride in their communities, they can take pride in their cities. That people who rent can achieve their version of the American dream without actually owning the house that they live in. That people who rent are not dangerous people. And that our community has 102,000 people, Eau Claire County, and maybe a few of the supervisors here who live in rural communities, very rural areas like town of Otter Creek, may not have any renters in your specific constituency, but most of us represent homeowners and renters. And that I think that one of the things that makes Eau Claire great, our rich tapestry, is regardless of your wealth, your gender, your sexual orientation, your ethnicity, whether or not you're a homeowner or a renter, you are a valued member of this community.
Thank you. Supervisor Bates.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My only concern about this is apparently, if I'm not mistaken, this is a 9/10 of an acre lot. And on that 9/10 of an acre, you could potentially have somewhere in the neighborhood of 14 to 16 units or higher, which leads me to question how many children will be in these units, and has it been considered what kind of space will be allowed for children to thrive?
Supervisor Steinhauer, maybe you can answer that?
Is it on?
Let's see.
Yeah, thank you,
Why
Mr. Chairman.
don't you check to see if that's blinking?
Okay, that's working. What I was going to say is this particular lot is 9/10 of an acre. Of the other lots that are around it, where they're afraid that there might be more multifamily housing going in, those lots are only half that big, about 1/2 an acre. So this is the only one that is large enough for the multifamily concept. And so as far as it being spread, that's pretty well not going to happen. The other thing is, this is just a zoning change. If and when it comes to whether they're going to actually build a building, there will be a lot of plans put in as far as the building size, the number of units, how much parking is needed, how much green space is needed. All these things are done by our county staff. And included is water disposal from rainwater that ends up on the lot, how it can be handled. So most likely, rather than 14 or 16 units, it most likely will be less. 14 or 16 will end up being the max. There is a theoretical max, but when you take into consideration parking and the disposal of water, it always reduces it down. So I think the fear of the multi-family unit is not really well founded. I believe it's going to fit in that mixed area very well. I'm one of that voted in favor of it also.
Thank you.
I guess that really didn't answer my question. How much green space is there? I mean, if you have 14, 16 units, even if you only have one child per unit, that's 16 children.
Okay,
What
I think
is there for green space?
if there's no objection, what if we see if Matt can answer some of Supervisor Bates' questions, even though I know the specific plans aren't before us.
Right. So keep in mind what's on the table tonight is the appropriateness or inappropriateness of the proposed land use. As far as if it were approved, it would have to be reviewed, and it's been alluded to through a site plan process. So there's specific standards for the R3 district for multifamily, and I don't know them all off the top of my head, but for example, they have to provide, I believe, 35% open space, and what that means, that could be landscape space, or excuse me, they can cover no more than 35% of the lot with improvements, and that would be building footprint, parking areas, hardscapes of various sorts. So basically, 2/3 of the site, and some of that will be used for on-site rainwater detention, stormwater, and then they also have to have at least, I believe, 35% open space. Now, it doesn't necessarily mean it's a park. You know, they're designing for a certain demographic. And again, we can't dive in the weeds and know that right now. And as Supervisor Buchanan alluded to, a lot of it is really the quality of the product that they're going to produce. And at this point, at this juncture, we really do have to kind of go off their representations. However, you know, they are limited to the density they can build. They will have standards that they have to adhere to in terms of, you know, the overall site design. It needs to be functional, safe, and meet all county codes. So as far as those specifics, I do know the applicant's here tonight if you had further questions, but we're really here to evaluate,
Right.
you know,
Okay. the
overall
I think that's
use.
enough there. Okay, Supervisor DeLuca.
Thank you. Actually, when I was reading the information, I was concerned, like Supervisor Dunning, of the change of the comprehensive plan, not giving homeowners a chance to say, yes, I want to buy a house in this area, and so forth. I personally have been a renter, and when I came to purchase my home, I wanted to kind of know what was going to happen around my home. And tonight, I actually wasn't quite sure where the property was, so I drove out there, and I was quite amazed at how close all the homes are to each other in that area. And that's where the London Road goes from like a 3-lane down into a 2-lane and quite curvy and so forth. So at this point in time, I am not going to support this resolution. Thank you.
Thank you. Supervisor Ritchie.
I don't think this is a good idea either. I think the question is what's right for the city or the county versus what's right for this one developer. The developer's got a piece of land, and if he can squeeze in an 8-unit, by God, he can make a lot more money doing that than he can if he fixes up the duplex that's there and puts it into conformity with the rest of the people in that residential area. I don't think we should be rewarding somebody who lets his place get dilapidated so we can say it's atrocious, we ought to tear it down, because anybody who had this plan of trying to build a more profitable thing can worm his way into it by letting things get so bad that you think I should have to tear it down. But this is all zoned R1 in that area, and we do have planning with that. We don't just stick multiple family homes anywhere a developer can squeeze them in. there is organization to the city, and if we get too much high-density stuff in one area, it causes problems with kids in schools. We've already got a very, very high-dense area on Fairfax and in across Gulf Road, all over in that area, and these kids, I assume, would all be headed to Robbins Elementary, I assume. So I think that the better thing is that we should try and keep this a stabilized R1 area. And if he's got to fix it up, keep it a duplex, keep it a duplex. But we're not going to start changing everything around just because one developer can squeak in an 8-unit building when that's not what the rest of the area in the immediate surrounding community has set up for.
Thank you. Supervisor Conlon.
My understanding from what I've heard is that there was a comprehensive plan that did not entail multifamily dwellings here. And that sometime in the last 4 or 5 years it was changed because previous to this had been disallowed on the basis it didn't meet the plan, I assume, and neighborhood resistance to it 11 years ago. I mean, this is the second go around of someone trying to put a multifamily dwelling there. It was refused 11 years ago. The plan changed. I guess my concern is, were the residents informed that the plan was changed or in the process of being changed, and were they aware of all this? Because this sounds a lot like bait and switch to me, and I just, you know, if you buy a property under a certain set of presumptions, and if you do your due diligence and find out that the comprehensive plan says this neighborhood is going to look like this, and then suddenly, while your back is turned, the plan changes, and all of a sudden you're in a whole different situation, that just isn't right. I mean, in places that are unzoned and unplanned, I guess people can do what they want with the property, but this is zoned, the plan was there, the plan changed. I don't think these residents were informed that the plan was changing or had changed, and I'm not sure that these residents had any input to the new plan. And that, to me, seems wrong.
Let me see if Supervisor Gibson, do you know what was done with Town of Washington comprehensive plan and the communication?
I do not, but I do know the towns, all the towns, you know, they have the same type of notification as what we do for any meetings that we have. They're all meetings, they do publish them, they do have invitations out there, you know, so.
Right, thank you. Supervisor Henning.
If a person is going to buy land, as you just suggested, and they're worried about what's going to be there, they should go to the town and ask about the comprehensive plan and get educated. When I was on the Lake District, we had a person went out on double Q and bought a big lot, put up a great big home, and then complained because he was getting taxes for the Lake District. He knew it was on his tax deed, and he said, I didn't see it. Well, if you're gonna buy a lot and put a house up, and you don't even check on what your taxes are, it's the same thing as a comprehensive plan, which is recommended to be looked at every year by the legislative bodies, because things change every year, and they recommend that you look at your comprehensive plan every year. But for people, you can't, ignorance is not an excuse. So we had a place in Altoona that was bad shape, but the heirs wouldn't even accept it. And so through the process, when it got torn down, a multi-unit building went in there, and there was not one neighbor that complained when they sent the letters out about it being there. And now they're very happy with it because it looks nice and it's clean, and they don't have any problems with it. But the town of Washington voted unanimously for this, and I don't think we as an individual that don't even know what the comprehensive plan is should figure that we're the person that should make that decision that, oh, they didn't look at it. I don't think that's right. But the town of Washington thinks it's fine and they want it. I'm gonna support it.
Supervisor Ritchie for the second time.
Yes, I had a question that I forgot
Okay.
to raise last time, but when I looked at the rendering of it, to me, it didn't look like they have garages. Do they have garages? Because, I mean, everybody calls it high-end, and everybody thinks whatever they're building is high-end. But if they're not building garages, that suggests to me that it's not that high-end, and it's more, rather than eating up space and profit with the garage, that it's more intended for high density, get as many apartments in as you can, which I think indicates just the opposite of what they're talking about with high end.
I'm not sure if anybody can speak to that on the garages. Is it correct that they're not that far along, garages aren't?
I'm just looking at the drawing that was on the plan.
Right.
It didn't-
Matt, would you mind coming back one time and add some clarification here about what the drawings mean vis-a-vis?
Gonna get some frequent flyer miles coming up here. Yeah, so in the staff report that's in your packet, there's the one rendering that they gave us. It's illustrative only. It doesn't necessarily show what the actual final product would be. To confirm, though, it did not portray garages as shown. So again, that's not our level of analysis at this point, but just to clarify that did not show that.
Supervisor Stelgis for the second time.
Hate to drag you back up there again. So, I'm confused. I think I've heard two different answers to the question that I'm trying to get to. That is, was the comprehensive plan changed from 2007, when this was previously denied, between then and now? And
Okay,
I heard
so
you say no, but I heard Supervisor Conlon say it was changed.
No, prior to 2010 is when the law went into effect in the state of Wisconsin requiring all municipalities to have a comp plan. Prior to that, most jurisdictions had what was known as a land use plan. And that land use plan that was in place in 2007, when this was previously brought forth, also talked about a mixed use type of scenario. So at that time, staff's recommendation was, yes, this is consistent with that plan. In 2009, after I believe a 2-year process, the town adopted their last plan, and a month ago, after an 18-month process, they adopted another plan, an update to that, and I can confirm that that was not changed. That area was not. There was no change. So it's, ostensibly, there's been no change to that for probably 15 years, plus or minus. So.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Supervisor Pagonis.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just feel that this has been somewhat mischaracterized. Right down the street is a very substantially large apartment building. I mean, you can look at it on the maps, and it's not very far away, and it's significantly larger than the apartment building we're talking about. So for people to say this is a high-density, single dwelling environment, that's not correct. So, it's already a mixed-use environment. And so I think that it's a mischaracterization. It's true, the street behind it on Bryan and Blakely, they are more individual single-family dwellings, but this particular area of London Road is already highly mixed.
Thank you. Supervisor Condon.
My question's been answered, thank you.
Thank you. Supervisor Beckfield.
I drive past this is not in my district, but it's right next door, and very familiar with this. I was raised in the town of Washington, and I can tell you a lot of these people have lived there a very long time. And one of the things that I'm concerned about is when you talk about that type of density and that size lot, is how many stories high is it going to be? Is it going to be 3 stories high like the one at London Road? And whatever that street is just down the road. Example of, in my district, we had the same type of, about an elderly home that worked out just fine, but we negotiated with the neighbors and we reduced the size and the height, and they're one of our best neighbors and one of my biggest supporters right down in there. So I'm going to vote against this because I don't think enough's been narrowed down on this. I don't like the density. I'll tell you what, when you have that many units in that small an area, that many cars coming out on that particular street, you know, you got one entrance in and out. I just have too many concerns about that. I think they can work it out between the landowners adjacent to them. My recommendation is to take it back and come back to us later, but you know, right now I'm a no because there's just too many ifs, ands, or buts about it. So.
Supervisor Buchanan.
Thank you. It seems that there are two major debates and two specific issues in this one vote. One of them is about specifics. It is about how many units is being crammed in, how many specific places are trying to be put into this less than 1 acre lot. Is there, what's the quality of the design building, are there garages, etc. From my understanding and what I've heard, and from my time on council, my time here on county board, those would seem to be site plan concerns as opposed to more so zoning concerns. I have numerous concerns about this project. Those are site plan concerns I have. The second debate, the second issue that's resolving around this vote is, for lack of a better phrase, a philosophical concern on what makes a neighborhood, and are these people welcome in this neighborhood. And I think that from comments I've made earlier that renters and homeowners can be together, and I don't think that it is inappropriate based on the what's been going on here. So while I have concerns about the project, those would be addressed in the site plan debate, not the zoning debate, and so I'm voting yes on the zoning.
Thank you, and Supervisor Dunning.
There has been some talk, just previous questions or a couple questions ago, about the height of the building. It's limited to 35 feet, but I believe that that big building that was also mentioned is more than 35 feet high. So if the zoning was amended one time to allow something more than 35 feet, who says it can't be, that it won't be done again? And I think that building over that is, I think it's 4 stories, but which makes it real hard to get under 35 feet.
Okay. Supervisor Clark, and then I think we may be ready to vote. Supervisor Clark.
I would just like to remind everybody that we are not voting on, as Supervisor Buchanan pointed out, we are not voting on a site plan. Site plans can be denied and changed. What we are voting on is a zoning issue. Can we give the individual who owns the land the authority through zoning to make a plan to build rental property? That's all, and at that point, those plans can be changed, they can be denied, whatever. We saw this happen not too long ago on Water Street. Somebody wanted to tear down a couple of houses and put up this big monstrosity, and it was, I mean, it took them months and months and months to get it passed so they could do something. And just remember, we're not voting on what this building is going to look like or whether it's going to have a garage, any of those things. We're voting on permission to do something with the property. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I see no other requests to speak. It appears you're ready to vote, so let's do so. I'll repeat the motion. It's concerning file 128. The motion is amending the 1982 official zoning district boundary map for the town of Washington as described. So if you would please vote on that motion at this time. And Supervisor Bates, if you'd re-vote there, please. Thank you very much. That motion passes. There's 15 yes and 12 no. Moving on to our last item of business this evening, file 135.
authorizing the sale of tax deed property to former owners Philip R. Spratt and Marcy A. Spratt for $20,667.11, directing Corporation Counsel to prepare the quitclaim deed and the county clerk to execute said quitclaim deed.
May I have a motion, please? A motion by Supervisor Beckfield with a second by Supervisor Smyer, and an explanation by Supervisor Dunning.
This is some property that we took on a tax deed in the process of going through the gaining that property to the county's use. The family who previously owned it came up with the financing to buy it back, and therefore we have received a check for the amount that was shown on your book of $20,667.11. So this is to approve the resale of this house back to them.
Thank you for the explanation. Any questions for Supervisor Dunning or any discussion? I see none, so please vote on file 135, authorizing the sale of tax deed property to former owners Philip Spratt and Marcy Spratt. Supervisor Olson, if you'd re-vote there, please. Thank you very much. And that motion is adopted unanimously. Thank you, everyone. That's our last item of business for this legislative session. Next meeting of the board will be the new board on April 17th. Thank you very much. Meeting is adjourned.
This program was brought to you by a cooperation between Newsworks and Eau Claire County. Newsworks is made possible by continuing community support. If you would like to volunteer or make a donation, please contact us via phone at 715-839-5067 or online at valleymediaworks.org.